I tried to explain to this judge, like, well, if somebody came and yelled and shot a gun a few times outside your bedroom window, would you think you're afraid? Would you think you're going to die?
That was the voice of my next guest as she's talking about her real life story of trying to escape narcissistic abuse from a man who threatened her life. Welcome back to season 4 of the podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Blackwood. As many of you know, I wrote my autobiography as a survivor of human trafficking. It's called Custom Justice, but if you didn't know, you do now. Keeping in line with that, this podcast has been dedicated to interviewing people who also wrote about their own experiences as trauma survivors and how they overcame the past. Stories of hope live here. She is the author of Gasping for Air, The Stranglehold of Narcissistic Abuse. This is an incredible author, an amazing survivor. You guys are going to love her. It's Dana S Diaz. Thank you so much for joining us, Dana.
Thank you for having me.
I am really excited to get to talk to you. We talked a little bit before the show. You got to hang out with my friend David recently, and David is another podcaster.
Yes.
He's such an amazing human being. So I just love him. So just a quick shout out to David. Thank you.
Yeah,
David.
absolutely. And if anyone has not heard him, his voice is like literally, it's like smooth, berry white. Like it's amazing.
Goodness. He has the perfect voice for podcasting.
He literally does.
And he's one of the nicest people.
Man. Yeah, he really is.
Yeah. And I won't go into too many details because I don't want to take too much time away from what we're going to talk about.
Definitely.
But when he and I first met, there was a miscommunication between us. And it got really bad there for a little while until finally we had a face-to-face meeting because all this was happening in email. And we're both looking at each other going, "You're not what I expected."
Oh, no. That's
now we're friends for life.
That's amazing. It's great to turn things around like that.
So let's talk a little bit about you. Where are you originally from? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Chicago, north side of the city, suburban area, and I am still sadly in Illinois, not where I want to be. I'd rather be somewhere tropical and warm and happy, but I am here. But I'm 90 miles outside the city, so there's cornfields all around me, and it's peaceful and wonderful, and like children of the corn out here, but that's all right because I stay inside all day and write and podcast, and I can reach out into the world through my computer screen.
Well, being surrounded by the cornfields sounds so much better than being surrounded by the big city.
So. Yeah, I'm not going to lie. It is peaceful, especially, I mean, I hate to use this as a segue, but, when you do come out of trauma, and you're trying to heal, I'm not going to lie. It is amazing. We have a 25-acre property with a pond, and my husband's just such a sweetheart. He mowed a little path out by the creek in the back part of the property. It's my own private little river walk. Like if I just want to go and take a walk and not be by anyone or anything even more, then I have that private place to do that. And it's nice. There's something about being in nature and hearing the birds and the bugs and the water and all that stuff, the leaves rustling, that it does definitely calm your nervous system and help you just kind of reset, give you some perspective on that. And I will say, being in the country, the night skies are the most amazing thing because there's no city lights or distractions. I mean, it is pitch black out there and you can just see forever. It's really cool.
Oh, that sounds like a little slice of heaven, honestly.
It really is. Here I just complained about it and now I'm saying it's a slice of heaven. So I just can't figure it out. I just wish it weren't in Illinois. Let's put it that way. But politics aside.
Just remember, all the tropical places are going to be just as overrun as the large cities.
I know, but I know. I still like going and visiting them though.
Yeah, exactly. It's especially fun off season. So
yes.
What was the trauma that you had to go through that made you want to be 90 miles outside of the city and find this place that's calming and relaxing?
Well, it was before I was even born, I guess. My life was just kind of stacked against me. And as we discussed, I know that I am not the most traumatized or abused person in the world, but I think suffering is suffering. And I had a very painful life and had to deal with a lot of emotional stuff growing up. I was born to a teenage mother. She did not want me. And it was not something that was hidden either. But grandma and great grandma insisted that she keep me because they weren't going to have their only grandchild, great grandchild, raised by strangers. So I was kept. But my mother was always very emotionally distant. I mean, it just was like I was there, I was her kid, but she didn't want to acknowledge that. She just didn't want to love me, basically. You know, she was ashamed of me, because, and people have to realize, I mean, I was born in the 70s, and back then it still wasn't socially acceptable. It's not like today a teenager has a baby and everybody's like, oh, yay, let's have a baby shower and grandma's gonna watch it while you go to work or school or whatever. It wasn't like that back then, you know. So, you know, she faced a lot of heartache and issues, you know, with having to live in a shelter for a while. And I was born at the Salvation Army Hospital. Thank goodness for them. So, you know, it was hard for her. I recognized that, but to have me live with her shame was something that I just wish that she would have considered before doing that to me. What was worse, though, is that she started dating a man when I was a year old, and when I was 7, they got married, and that was my worst nightmare because I even at that young age, I never liked him, couldn't put my finger on it. I was just a little girl, but he was just not a good human being. I just did not like him. He seemed very fake. Very, you know, he brought me stuffed animals, and when we were with people, he was the one way, very funny, charming, you know, put his arm around me like everything was great. And then behind closed doors, as usual, that's when the stuff would happen. And it started out with the verbal, which, you know, we'll get into that. But for people who think that, you know, I'm too sensitive or it's just verbal, let me tell you, it can do some damage. Not just emotionally, it can cause physical damage, as I later found out.
Yeah.
So the verbal abuse was still pretty awful. And I want people that are listening to this to literally think of a 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old little girl that you know, and imagine saying these things to her every day. Imagine her parents saying these things to her. You should have never been born. I shouldn't have to pay for another man's child. Nobody's ever going to love you. Why would anybody love you? I shouldn't even have to feed you. I mean, just all of these things every day. And how do you develop a healthy self-esteem that's not encouraging, you know, anything that I accomplished because I was found to be very smart? They actually wanted to move me up 2 grades. No, we're keeping her back. You know, it was diminished. I taught myself how to play piano. No more piano lessons, because I taught myself, then they gave me lessons. No more lessons when I started writing my own music. First chair viola and 2 symphonic orchestras. We're not paying for those lessons now either. So it's like every time I had some kind of promise of talent or success or achievement, it was diminished or squashed. I was not allowed. I was the ultimate scapegoat child, like ultimately. They did have a child together when I was 14. And of course, you know, it is very typical golden child, scapegoat child scenario. You know, if he so much as mumbled, he was a genius. And, you know, he was everything. He got 2 parents who wanted him, loved him, thought he was the best thing ever. I was nothing. I would never be anything. I was incompetent, incapable, stupid. I wasn't skinny enough, gave me anorexia by the time I was in 7th grade, and I was maybe 100 pounds. So, you know, but it was never enough. My hips were widening. So and that peanut butter and jelly sandwich is going to make you fat. You shouldn't eat that bowl of pasta. Do you want to be that fat? Do you want to get fat like, you know, so-and-so? Or it just, there was a lot going on. So in the midst of all this, there was the physical. So when I was little, it was little stuff. It was like putting my hair in pigtails to get ready for school, but pulling really tightly, and then making fun of me because he pulled so tightly, my eyes would be stretched back, and then he would make derogatory comments about a certain people with squinty eyes, let's say. And forgive me, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but it was just, you know, things like that. And then it grew into, I would, say something to him, stand up for myself, and then he would grip me too hard, like squeezing my arm or squeezing my ankle, just grabbing me and making sure to leave hand marks to make sure it hurt. As I got a little older, I started telling my mother. She said I was lying to make things up. I was jealous of their relationship. She said she talked to him and he was denying it, said that he had no idea what I was talking about. So then I was delusional. Another time I remember picking up the phone to call her to tell her about something going on, and he grabbed the phone and beat me with it. So then ultimately by the time I was 17, the worst scenario was that, I'm 17. I've lived with all this. I mean, if you imagine how a person feels when you feel that insignificant and that unworthy, and that, you have this idea that you have to earn people's love for them to even give you the time of day, it's very hard to connect and make friends. And I had some friends, but, overall, I mean, girls were getting asked to dances at school and stuff, and I was having trouble, like, just even accepting a date with a boy, because I only liked the ones that told me I was ugly and looked like a dog. And, it was just so hard when you're going through high school to deal with your hormones and all these social pressures and everything. So one night I just got very angry about everything. Like, why am I even here? I said, why can't you effing love me? Why can't you care about me? Like, what is it about me? What can I do? And that brought on just the ultimate beating. And I was straddled, slapped, my mother is actually the one who put her hands on my neck, and to the point where I could not release her grip, and I was blacking out. I thought I was going to die until I realized I could kick her in the stomach, and then she kind of tossed me down the stairs, and I ended up in the landing, and I just got up and ran out of the house. I just couldn't do it. So that it was hard to grow up that way, just always feeling like exactly what he said, that I shouldn't be here. So why was I here? Because it felt like I was here to suffer, and it sucked.
Wow. And the suffering didn't end there either. I mean, you still had to go through other stuff after that. And what a lot of people don't know is what they don't realize is that when you grow up in these abusive environments, you learn that the people who say they love you are inevitably going to hurt you, and you learn to expect that. And if they don't hurt you, it means they don't love you.
Exactly. Because
And
there were nice boys that asked me out at school, or even, after high school, and I didn't know what to do with that. I
they're too
had to be
nice.
mistreated. I mean, we all like the bad boy a little bit, but I mean, I had to be talked down to, and they had to have, like, hate to call them the wife beaters, but with their muscles. There's one boy I'm thinking of in particular, and it was just like, ooh, that gets me going, because it was familiar, and we don't know what to do with the unfamiliar. And it is hard when you come out of a childhood like that. I mean, I didn't know the word for it then, but looking back, I mean, they basically, made me codependent, which, yeah, it served me right up to another narcissist, because nobody loves a codependent more than a narcissist does. He wanted me to, if I followed all these rules and did all these things and basically served him, then he would give me love. And if I didn't, it was withheld. And if I didn't do it right, it was withheld. And so then, I ended up right out of that house swearing I would never, ever, ever let anyone mistreat me, and that would never happen again. And I'm going to live this great life without, these people who think they're my parents. And I fall for, well, he was a covert narcissist, but I didn't see it coming.
As much as we all hate commercials, they are a necessary evil these days. That's what keeps the show on the air. You can show support by purchasing one of my mini books or donating through PayPal. or even just leaving a review on whatever platform you listen to this podcast on. You can find the links for the books or donation options in the podcast description under the guest information. As always, a portion of the proceeds of everything made do go to local organizations that help fight human trafficking. Now back to the guest.
I did not see it coming because of the it's just such a different personality than my stepfather. My stepfather is very overt. He's in your face. I mean, he really does think he's the best and knows everything, and he just says it and he really believes it. Whereas my ex, the coverts, come off more insecure. I always say it's like Eeyore in the Winnie the Pooh series. Eeyore is always like, oh, nothing good ever happens to me, boo-hoo. That's kind of the attitude. So you kind of look at him like, oh, but I'll make it better and it's going to be great. And
you.
exactly. And then, and then he loves me and it's the two of us against the world. And we're the two black sheep of our families, except nothing he ever said about his family even made sense after I met them, because they were like this beaver cleaver family. I mean, like too perfect. And I unfortunately can say now, I mean, I think I fell in love with his parents more than I fell in love with him, because how could I not? I mean, his dad, especially, I just loved his dad. His dad's deceased now, but just a sweet man. He looked like Santa Claus and acted like it too. He loved me from the second he met me, and he just a sweet man. And I was so vulnerable to that. I mean, I'd never wanted anything more.
You'd never had a proper father figure.
Right. Or mother for that matter. So here I had like this vision, like, okay, like things aren't great with him. I see some red flags, and yeah, he has angry outbursts, and yeah, thought he was a jerk, honestly, first time I met him, and thought he was entitled and reminded me of my stepfather. But, I'm like, no, somebody like that wouldn't come out of a family like that. And, then it was also like, well, if I give it time, maybe he'll mature, or maybe he'll come to love me more, and going back into this codependency of like, if I do these things, that he likes, and again, there were a lot of unspoken rules, and I don't know how to communicate that to people, because I know a lot of people out there say, oh, well, I would never submit. Or if somebody told me, well, I thought that too. I also thought if somebody was unfaithful to me, or took advantage of my body, even though we were together, even though I didn't want it, it still can be non-consensual. But, people have all these ideas, and when you're in it, all I say is we're all human. I don't care if you're legally this, legally that, what should or shouldn't be, or what you think. You feel what you feel, and the things that happen to you, and that's what it is. That is the truth, and your truth is your truth. And right. I don't know what to tell people, but you find yourself in this situation where you learn by the glares and the clear signs of disapproval. Okay, I'm never going to cook the pot roast that way again. I won't put the carrots in next time, or I won't put too many onions, or okay, he doesn't like two meats that are on the same meat on two consecutive nights, and dinner had to have two sides, not one, two. Thank God a carb like a roll qualified as a side, because sometimes it's all I had. I mean, it's like this, and it sounds like silliness, but it was stuff like, as time progressed, maybe if I was homesick, I remember the one time he came home from work in the middle of the afternoon. It was like 3:00. He said, my God, you can't just get yourself looking nice for me when I come home. My mother did that with my dad. Like, you can't comb your hair and put some makeup on. And I'm like in my pajamas, like I was sick. I'd been in bed all day. No, I wasn't trying to doll myself up for you, buddy. Like and I say it snarky like that, but when you're in this situation, they instill a fear in you. Like I refer a lot. He had this nasty looking switchblade that he would keep by his side where he loved watching TV. And so he had his spot on this couch, and right there by the table there's a little drawer that this switchblade was in. And I always said I felt like it was a shock collar. Like I knew it was there to keep me in line as like this silent threat. And these are the things that the narcissists do. So there's this fear, you follow the rules can change, the rules are made up as you go. So sometimes you screw up and you didn't know you screwed up because you thought you followed the rule and you thought you did it exactly how they wanted it, but then it wasn't right because in that moment they decide it wasn't. It's a lot. It makes you feel crazy. And then they're calling you crazy. And he had me so convinced I was crazy that at one point I went to a psychiatrist because I mean, I clearly had anxiety and I was sad and all these things, that I went home with a bipolar diagnosis and 2 prescriptions that I took for 20 years. That now that I'm out, the doctor apologized and said, I didn't realize you had CPTSD from childhood and you were married to an a-hole, basically. So it wasn't even that you were bipolar. You just, when you were allowed to be happy, you were allowed to have joyful moments in life, but when these things would happen to you, obviously, yeah, you're down, you feel upset and sad. But unfortunately, nobody saw it because it only happened with us in the house. And outwardly, we were going to family holidays and to our son's t-ball games and everything with our cupcakes and our smiles. Like everything was just fine.
Wearing a mask.
Yes. And somebody I know brought that up not that long ago to me. She said, isn't it funny that they're the ones, these narcissists wearing the masks, but they turn us into the same people that they are. We're wearing the masks too. And we're lying about what really is. We're lying and making excuses for them. We're lying about, to cover, to keep the cover. And it's sad. I always said I didn't like who he turned me into. But that's the sad reality of it, and we're all human and we all react to things, whether you think it's reasonable or unreasonable. But, when you're being mistreated, it's an awful injury to your soul, really, especially when you've experienced it your whole life.
And it's not fair. It's still going to happen, of course, but it's not fair when somebody says, oh, if I were you, I would have, because if you're not in that situation, if you're not the one walking those steps at that exact moment in that exact situation with the background that you have no idea what you would do.
Right. And a lot of people, the other common reaction I've had from people now that people have read the book, or, that I've been speaking out, is, well, if it was so bad, why didn't you leave? We don't believe you because if it was so bad. And I'm like, well, I wasn't in the position to do that. And especially after we had a child together, I thought I was doing the noble thing, staying. I was born and raised Catholic, and I love my church and I love my priest, but boy, that played very heavily because I was not supposed to get a divorce. I was supposed to suffer no matter what. I knew what I married, and I, make your bed and you lie in it and you make the best of it. And, there's a lot of things though. People have financial inabilities to just up and walk out. There's families involved, and honestly, a lot of what kept me with him for so long were his parents and his sister and, his extended family, because I didn't have any relation, with my mother and stepfather. And they were so connected with their families that I just kept my distance from everybody because but the opposite side of that is being in a narcissistic relationship. How did I end up out here in the boonies? Well, my ex brought me out here, because why would he have me near people when he could move me out to where there was nobody and isolate me? So I had no friends, no family. All I had was him. He was my everything. The world, revolved around him. Sun rose and set around him, which is why after I had our son, everything just took a straight dive down to hell, honestly, because now I was giving my attention to this newborn baby and my time, and not to this man. So then he started threatening suicide, and he did it so often that the first couple times I took it seriously, but then I'm like, I have this baby. I have like, which one do I tend to? Like, what if he hurts himself and hurts me, and then the baby's here and the baby's going to die because nobody knows the baby's here and nobody's going to find, all these things go through your head and you're trying to choose between them. And I would always choose my son, and that angered him even more because I wasn't choosing him. But then over time, the suicide threats, I realized, were just meant to guilt me, but they were effective because how do you not take that seriously when somebody says they're going to end their life? Because on the off chance that this is the time they're going to do that, I can't have that on my conscience. It was such an overwhelming emotional struggle with him, but I mean, not a day went by, but there were moments during the day when he did love me. He would caress my cheek if we were watching TV and the baby wasn't crying and everything. I cooked a good dinner and everything was good, and we even laughed sometimes. But when I am with a man who, when things are bad, is intentionally wanting to cause me harm, that's a problem. That's not love.
Right.
That's not love. So it started making me seeing the good things, the loving things, as just a facade. That's what was keeping me there and giving me hope that things would be better. But the bad was what it was. Because I always say, I always try to be very reasonable, but my issue is when there's intention. And as time went on, it even got to where, once he got a smartphone, because I'm sorry for those of you listening, when we got together, there were no cell phones or smartphones. So as technology progressed in our relationship and the smartphones came along, he started texting and emailing me a lot, and just the nasty things, and the threats. He would start creating this narrative too with other people, calling my mother, calling his mother, telling them things about me that weren't true, but trying to create this narrative about me being unstable mentally and that maybe I'm not fit to be a mother, and that, it was just like this setup. And then he would start sending me messages and emails, and I have every one of them printed out, that he basically wanted me gone. I mean, he said in one email, it would be easier if one of us was just dead. And I know who he was talking about. He didn't mean him. So it would have been convenient for something to happen to me so that he could take his son. I mean, I feel like I'm like imagining these things, but I could just see it ahead of me. Like, he wanted to take my son, go out there and be like, poor me, my wife, killed herself, or she was in this accident, fell down the stairs, whatever it was. And now I have to be a single father and raise my son all by myself, and I'm not meaning to make fun, because there are situations and that does happen. But when somebody wants this to happen so that they can have people's pity, and with narcissists, they love money. He loved money. He would probably think that people would also give him money, and then he would go out and spend it on things he shouldn't. But, I just saw this all playing out, and that just made me fight even harder. But, again, I go back to, if you have to think about what it's like to be in that situation, oh, my mother's watching our son, let's go out on our boat for the afternoon. No, I don't really want to go out on the boat with you, just you and me, because I don't trust you. I don't trust that you're not going to throw me over. Does that sound paranoid? Yes, it does. And there was a point where, I wondered, am I that paranoid? Because, with all the gaslighting too, that never happened. I never said that. I just heard you say that 2 seconds ago. I never said that. So I started keeping, I actually took one of my son's notebooks, like at the end of the school year, when you get the notebook with all the scribbles on the cover, and they didn't scribble anything they needed for their education inside either, but they scribbled in some of it, so you can't use it again. So I tore out those pages that were used. I figured it was unsuspecting if anyone came across it, but I started recording right after something was said or done. I would write down date, time, and just a quick, like 2-sentence, like, this is what he said, this is what happened. And I hid this notebook in the basement under the cushion of the couch, because I figure if he found it, he would just think our son like stuck it under there and wouldn't hopefully look in it because he monitored everything. And after some time, it was actually around COVID, I had some time on my hands. I was looking through it and I'm like, if somebody came to me and said that these things were happening, like some of these things I actually forgot. And I never understood with trauma, like you literally can forget about some horrendous things that happen to you because you just don't want to face it and accept it. So I'm reading these things and I'm like, okay, I've got to elaborate because we're in COVID. I'm stuck in the house with this man. If something happens to me seriously, because I honestly thought he really did want me dead. I thought, let me elaborate. Let me write out the stories from my little, summaries. And that's actually what ended up being my book. Not all the stories are in here because there were just so many, but we selected some good ones, I guess. I mean, it's definitely something that sadly people are relating to. I even had somebody message me and say, it's like you wrote the book about my life. And it made me so sad that she has gone through so many of these same things, and so I just really think it's important for people to be aware that this goes on and that, these people that are victims are not in a situation usually that they're safe. If they expose their abuser, they're going to face consequences to that. So we have to be aware of what to look for in other people, but we can't we can't go in there either, and bust them out or, create any kind of a thing. And there is also a lot of shame people carry that they're in that situation. And I know for my son, he was 17 when I finally did divorce his dad. He had not seen and heard barely anything, but he saw and heard a lot. But even then, for him, he had made me swear never to call the police on his dad and never to file a report because he didn't want to be the kid whose dad was in jail or whose dad had been arrested or whose dad was an abuser, and I sadly respected that. I wish I hadn't because it worked against me when I had to file for an order of protection. Because things unfortunately got worse after the divorce. They got more violent, but that was the first thing the judge said to me. She said, okay, so this happened, but you've never filed a report. You can't sit here and tell me it's been bad for 25 years when I don't see that you're in any danger. And it was so heartbreaking, but I tried to explain to this judge, like, well, if somebody came and yelled and shot a gun a few times outside your bedroom window, would you think you're afraid? Would you think you're going to die? Because that's what he did. That's what he did. And the police didn't take him away. And I did not get an order of protection. I had to fight for one, which I eventually got one. And all it said was that he couldn't come within 10 feet of me.
10 feet.
10 feet.
That is ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm 5'3" and 100 pounds. You could throw a 2x4 at me from 10 feet away and probably knock me out. And I'm not trying to be funny. I'm just trying to be realistic.
Yeah.
But this is a man that ran around with guns and knives. And, I actually found out after everything was said and done, my next door neighbor revealed to me that my ex had been over there shortly before the gun incident. They had a bonfire and my ex was there, and he openly in front of everybody said that he was planning on killing me.
Please make sure that you come back next week to finish this interview. Dana and I did not get through the whole story, so we needed to split it up into 2 separate episodes. And of course, as usual, if you enjoyed tonight's episode, make sure you check out the episode description because that's where you're going to find links on how you can learn more about her. You can find links to connect with her on social media and to get her website and to support the podcast and to get her book and all this cool stuff. So, of course, remember, I don't get paid to do this. My boss is tight-fisted because I work for myself. And the show really is about the guests. So if you enjoyed their interview, please feel free to let them know. Reach out to them and tell them. You can also tune into my other podcast, Growth from Darkness, which is co-hosted by my friend from Australia, Chrysanthi. We talk about what trauma responses are, healthy ways to move beyond the past, and all that good stuff. So for more information, just go to growthfromdarkness.com.